Good day, everyone. Welcome to Blacklogic. This is where we're going to separate the truth from propaganda. So let's be very, very clear from the start. Foundational Black Americans are not Africans. Yes, our ancestry includes African blood, but our identity, our culture, our struggle, and our evolution were born in America, forged under a unique system of bondage and resisted, and that no other group on earth has experienced. We are not an import. We are an invention. We are the ethnogenesis of the Black American. That is what we are. But I want to share this video that I found on TikTok with you guys. And I know TikTok is a playground for people who really are not that educated in some regards. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that everybody isn't. But again, it is just a cesspool. And I want to share this video with you guys of this gentleman speaking about alternatives to FBA and Black natives and American Indians, that these pseudoscience groups speaking very disparaging to a certain degree and not understanding the true ethnogenesis and how I'm gonna break this down.
If it's one thing that Black people have, it's intuition. So even if we lack the background knowledge on certain topics, we can kind of sense when it's bullshit. And I was so proud seeing all of my fellow Black people just shutting down this FBA and Pocahontas pretendian nonsense. So I'm here to bring you some background knowledge on a concept that both the US government and these pseudo-Black nationalist groups don't want you to know about. It's known as Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is a cultural, political, and economic project aimed at uniting Black people worldwide. That's those on the continent of Africa and all throughout the diaspora. Some people get confused. They think Pan-Africanism requires travel plans. The reason why we should connect is because we have a shared destiny, a shared struggle. The same forces that exist in Senegal exist in South Central. The same forces that exist in Liverpool exist in Rio de Janeiro. You could be Jamaican, Kenyan, Brazilian, a New Yorker, Yoruba, Muslim, atheist. None of that matters. We're united on the fact that we have a shared ancestry and we have a shared struggle. We aren't looking for purity. We're looking for solidarity. This solidarity, it includes all those with African descent. That's even indigenous peoples and Afro-Latinos. Historically, our leaders have always pushed for global Black solidarity, from Malcolm X to Martin Luther King to the Black Panther Party to the Nation of Islam. In fact, it's difficult to name any Black movements that didn't embrace the philosophy of Pan-Africanism.
Wow, that was a lot being said, ladies and gentlemen. And not to dispel, but we need to educate our brothers and sisters when it comes to this, because they keep pushing this Pan-Africanism on foundational Black Americans simply because they do not agree. And they truly do not understand, because Pan-Africanism has not helped foundational Black Americans with anything. As a matter of fact, Pan-Africanism have been a detriment to foundational Black Americans. And as you stated, he named all of our master teachers within the space. I'm surprised he didn't bring up Marcus Garvey, who was from the Caribbean, no less. I think he was Jamaican, by the way. But why didn't you bring up Marcus Garvey? Why did you bring up Malcolm X and Martin Luther King? Why did you bring up our great master teacher who actually stood on business and 10 toes down? And back then, when they were kind of pushing the Pan-Africanism, how has it helped us now? Because a lot of their works with civil rights has been beneficial, not only for foundational Black Americans, but for Americans in general. So how has that helped? And they're still trying to say that, FBA is some pseudoscience that Tariq Nasheed kind of made up. Just like Jesse Jackson coined the term African American. Just like one of our great master teacher, Dr. Claude Anderson, coined the term MBA, Native Black Americans. And then that kind of got mixed and mastered. So Tariq Nasheed came out with Foundational Black American that to this point is very secure and it can't be mixed and matched. We are the foundation of America. We built America. Now, granted, as I always say, because you're going to have some little hate comments below. Yeah, other groups came later to help out once we built the foundation. The Chinese, the Irish, they came over and helped later. But the very foundation of America was built on the backs of Blacks without blood, sweat, and tears of this land. So in all, let's kind of break down and give scholarship to people who may not understanding what a foundational Black American is and why we're not stating that we're African. Yes, we do have African ancestral African genetics. We do have African genes. But some people are asking then, what is an ethnogenesis? If you look at anthropology, ethnogenesis is the process by which a new ethnic group emerges through shared experiences, culture, and collective history, especially under pressure. The Blacks that went to Jamaica didn't have the same experience of foundational Black Americans in America. The Blacks that went to Brazil, the Blacks that stayed in colonizing Africa through the Berlin Conference, we all did not have the same experiences. We had similar experiences. Some of them was the same, but we had very distinct cultural backgrounds and experiences depending on the colonialism and the slavery that we were adhered to in those particular regions and land masses. What are they talking about? You can look at the United States Library of Congress of Anthropology and review the database of 2019 to understand what is an ethnogenesis. Ethnogenesis is not about DNA alone. It's about formation. When you look at the Romans turned into Latins. When you look at the Greeks turned into Italians. The Haitians turned to enslaved Africans and Tainos, and the Europeans into a new people through revolution. So foundational Black Americans are forged by chattel slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and civil rights, a 400-year crucible that made us distinctively American. We are not merely of African descent. We are the descendants of a historical process that birthed a new nation within a nation. The ethnogenesis of FBAs, when we really look at it, the African ancestry, the root of it all, roughly 38 to 42% of the genetic lineage of Black Americans come from West and Central Africa. And you can look at that source in the American Journal of Human Genetics. But that's just part of the equation, because over 24% of foundational Black Americans poses European DNA. Even myself, I have 8% European DNA. I know you may not see it in my color tone, but nonetheless, I have 8%. A lot of that derives from being Irish and I think with some Scottish as well. And this is a genetic scar of rape and coercion during slavery. When we look at it, historical and genealogical records confirm that interracial marriages and alliances between enslaved Africans and indigenous tribes, as well as with Europeans, mixed and mastered that created, or which was the hallmark and foundation of an ethnogenesis. They created all these people. We look at indigenous tribes like the Cherokee and the Choctaw and the Seminole and the Blackfoot, and even the pre-Columbian Black populations. If you look at some of our brothers' work, Chase McGee, he wrote a book, 19 White Men Who Admitted They Were Indigenous Black People in the Americas Before Slavery. And just for a reference, let me pop that on your screen for you guys. This is a book that you can buy from Amazon. You can look at the audio book. And again, he has factual documentation within the book. So again, we have a very distinct and different cultural and ancestral background than all these other people. But people don't want to exploit, rather, they don't want to promote that in any sense of the word. So foundational Black Americans' DNA is tricontinental. Africa, European, and the indigenous Black people, as well as the native, quote unquote, Siberian, Mongolian looking people as well. That's why you'll look at some Black people, they damn near look Asian sometimes, but they have dark toned skin. When you look at the Sand people, which are considered some of the first people, they also call them the Bush people that live in Africa. They look like Black Asians. So when we have these different distinct groups and we say that we had an ethnogenesis, they're not understanding that we are tricontinental, that we have African genetics, we have European genetics, we have what they call Native American, the Siberian, Mongolian looking people genetics. Also, we have Aboriginal, indigenous, Black American genetics that of the Black people were here prior to slavery, prior to the Europeans coming over. So that's not purely African. That makes foundational Black Americans a new people, born of the American experience. So when Tethers, and as one of my commenters and subscribers stated, domestic Tethers like himself, immigrants from Africa or the Caribbean, and do not forget, when I'm speaking of Tethers, Tethers can be Asian, Tethers can be Hispanic, Tethers can be non-Black people, but because of these tethers from Africa and Caribbean that cosplay and undermine because they blend in, because they can skin in, that is why we call them out more so than the other people where we expect that sort of behavior and descent for foundational Black Americans. That is why. So Tethers socialized in the idea that FBAs are just Africans or foreigners, that they erase our unique identity and claim our struggle as theirs. This confusion undermines lineage-based reparation, cultural preservation, and historical truth. One peer-reviewed study notes that lumping all Black people under African American ignores distinct cultural histories and backgrounds. If you look at how New World people are formed, let's look at the Puerto Ricans. Puerto Ricans are a blend of Spaniards, Taino Indians, and enslaved Africans, but you don't hear no one talking about an Afro Puerto Rican, do you not? Oh man, yeah, I'm an Afro Puerto Rican. You don't hear that terminology because they are mixed. There are some white looking Puerto Ricans and there are dark Puerto Ricans just as well as my color. Majority of Puerto Ricans that I've seen are in the middle. They're kind of like a light brown skin, but nonetheless, where do you think they get their melanin from? Puerto Ricans also went through an ethnogenesis, but no one is going out the way to make Puerto Ricans African. You don't hear anyone talking about African Puerto Ricans, do you not? When we look at Brazilians, I've been to Brazil. Brazilians descend from Portuguese colonists, Africans, and the indigenous Tupi tribes of Brazil. Now, in Brazil, there is a culture of calling some dark-colored Brazilians Afro-Brazilians. That is because the foundation of Brazil, of colonization by the Portuguese, is white. So if you notice in countries that white people have truly colonized, where a lot of them have stayed, they call them Afro whatever. But if you talk to a Dominican, they could be my color. I know I'm no black. I'm no black. I'm no negro. They would tell you some of these things, and some of them will contribute to some of their African ancestry. But all of these different groups have been through an ethnogenesis. Afro Brazilians that are black, they don't call themselves Afro-Brazilians. It'd be the white people that do that. When you look at Jamaicans, Jamaicans have went through some form of colonization by the way of Great Britain, as well as some form of mix and matches. But Jamaicans, you don't hear anyone going to Jamaica. I've been to Jamaica, very beautiful country, very beautiful people, but you never hear Jamaicans talking about Afro-Jamaican or African Jamaicans. They are their own people, or they're not. Why can't foundational Black Americans be their own people right here in the country that they build? When you look at Belizeans, people from Belize, you don't hear Afro-Belizeans. When you look at people from Trinidad, you don't hear about Afro-Trinidadians, even though in Trinidad and Tobago, they have a large Indian population. You don't hear these from these other groups, but only with us. Do you know why? Where the energy, where the power, where the spirit, we're the foundation. We are the culture that has been exploited around the world, from British colonial system that mixed African labor with Asian indentured workers and European planters. Each group has its own ethnogenesis, its own blend of pain, power, and place. It's all distinct to that certain environment with their own behaviors and their cultures and traditions. They can be Jamaican, they can be Belizeans, they can be Trinidadian, they can be Dominicans, they can be Puerto Ricans, and we can be, and we are, foundational Black Americans. Stop with all this Pan-Africanism that we should join forces together and we should do this. We tried it and it didn't work. We tried it and we're being undermined. We tried it and they're in the higher points of government passing legislation for their countrymen, not for foundational Black American, not the energy, not the root, not the foundation, not the base, not the people who passed all these civil rights laws that all these immigrants have benefited from. So don't tell me that we should do a certain thing. No, what they should do is eliminate, they should demolish tribalism in Africa, and they should join as one, and then they can come to the table with some actual work that we can look and say, oh, there's no more tribalism in Africa. They have all joined hands together in kumbaya, and now we can fight the system of white supremacy and start to build our own. Then we can lean on our African genetics. Then we can lean on our African ancestral. But until then, we need to understand that we are different people. A Ghanaian doesn't state that he's Nigerian, does he not? Because they have a different tradition, they have different culture, they have a different background. So stop trying to put it in this generic category as these generic Africans. We are not. We are different people, just as all the other people I just stated. Our lineage was built right here on American soil. Our struggle defined by American law. Now to the problem of it all. Whether it be an international immigrant tether or domestic tether. A tether is an individual, often an immigrant or African or Caribbean descent, whose mind remains bound to colonial or foreign systems of power, resulting in behavior that undermines foundational Black Americans. They benefit from FBA-built systems, HBCUs, civil rights laws, minority business grants, but they disrespect the lineage that made those systems possible. Again, Tether say things like Africans work harder and Caribbeans are smarter and Black Americans are lazy. These aren't opinions, they are colonial echoes. If you look at some of the works of Franz Fanon that wrote in Black Skin, White Mass of 1952, and I'll show you that very quickly here. If you read this, it will break down some of the same things that I'm stating. And this is back from 1952, ladies and gentlemen. So again, the scam has been in full effect for a very long time. So they can miss me with all of this. Yeah, our ancestors, our great master teachers lended a hand out in Pan-Africanism. And then why do you think it's been dialed back? Because it has not been beneficial for foundational Black Americans. It has been detrimental to foundational Black Americans. The colonized mind is envious of the colonizer, is it not? Again, the colonized mind, or rather the colonized man, those who are being colonized, is envious of the colonizer. They're envious of his power, his wealth, and his skin. That's why you have people that come over here that pay tribute to the white man. That's why when you have white people to go to Africa, they worship the very ground that they step on. That envy turned into cultural reflex and validation by whiteness. Tethers bring the mentality to America, viewing FBAs not as leaders, but as inferior in the colonial hierarchy they were taught to obey. And again, this has nothing to do with white people, no less. White people are just being white people. They're white people that operate within a system of white supremacy, and then there's white people who don't. There's white people who are not racist. There are white people who are not discriminatory. Then there are white people there are. But again, this is the colonized mind that comes from a lot of these Caribbean and African countries. This mindset didn't start in Brooklyn or Atlanta. Again, I told you guys, it started in Berlin in 1884 at the Berlin Conference, when you had European powers like Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal divided Africa like a cake with no African leaders present. You think they know this? Did they do their research? I don't know. Because if you look at the General Act of the Berlin Conference, again, 1885, if you look at the Scramble of Africa, that work was published in 1991, they installed a racial hierarchy. Europeans at the top, educated natives in the middle, and the indigenous majority at the bottom. Those middlemen became today's colonial elites, the prototype for the modern tether. From 1990 to 2022, African and Caribbean students' enrollment at HBCUs rose by over 200%, according to the NCES of 2023 report. And over 30% of Black student aid grants went to non-FBA students, money intended for descendants of U.S. slavery right here in these United States of America. And you can reference that in the Education Data Initiative in 23 as well. If we look at the post-2020 Fortune 500 companies pledged $50 billion to racial equity, less than 3% reach FBA organizations. Many high-profile Black politicians from Caribbean as well as Africa backgrounds, they rarely propose lineage-based reparation or target Black American relief bills. They support diversity funding that includes everyone but foundational Black Americans. Many FBAs say, why can't we just unite like this young fellow with Africans and Caribbean and have a sense of unity and pride and Pan-Africanism? And the answer is very simple. We cannot unite with someone who refuses to see us as equals. We cannot unite. We cannot unite with someone who refuses to see us as equals. Unity requires mutual respect and shared goals. Tethers often seek to replace FBAs. They seek to replace FBA leadership, not support it. They inherit our victories, but erase our voices. They celebrate our culture, but reject our claims. That's not coalition. That's colonization through proximity, is it not? When I continue to look at genetic anthropology, FBAs show unique DNA clusters not present in recent African immigrants or Caribbeans, proving a very distinct gene pool that was evolved in the US. And you can look up that in Bryce. I forgot the work, but it was published back in 2015, BRYC Bryce 2015. When we look at the cultural anthropology of different groups in foundational Black American history, you look at the Gullah Geechee, you look at the Creole, and you look at the Freeman cultures, all unique to the U.S. Southeast, a product of centuries of cultural fusion. You have the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Study of 2019. Every civil rights law passed between 1866 and 1964 was won by foundational Black Americans, not immigrant communities. This is why reparations must be lineage-based, lineage-based, lineage-based. See, we don't hate Africans or Caribbeans by defining ourselves as foundational Black Americans. We honor our own creation. This is not about division and or hate. The delineation occurred a long time ago. Whereas though when we used to state that we were African, they said, no, you're not African, you're a Yankee. So now that we say that we're not African and we're foundational Black Americans, oh, you're now African. No, thank you for awakening us. You help push us in the right directions. Just as Haitians are Haitians and Jamaicans are Jamaicans, we are foundational Black Americans. We are foundational to this land. We are the descendants of those who built America from cotton fields to the capitals. Our history is not a branch of Africa, it's a root of America. We don't owe our identity to the motherland. We owe it to the blood, the laws, and the legacy we built right here on these streets of America. Foundational Black Americans are not Africans. We had an ethnogenesis. We are Americans with African ancestry, indigenous ties, and a freedom story unlike any other. We have a dash of African genetics. We have a dash of European genetics. We have a dash of the Siberian Mongolian genetics. And we have a dash of the Aboriginal Indigenous American Indians who were Black on this lands as well. So stop telling us we're African, because we're not. Our culture wasn't imported from Africa. It wasn't imported from Europe. It wasn't imported from Mongolia or Siberia. It was invented and started and founded right here in the United States through resistance. So again, demand lineage-based reparations and recognition. We are not a statistic, we are a people. Yes, we need to build economic, educational, and political networks that prioritize foundational Black American outcomes. We absolutely need to do that. Yes, we do. We need to do so much for our family. We need to recognize, first and foremost, when Tethers attempt to rewrite our narrative, how the difference hold the line. See, here on this channel, Blacklogic, this is where truth is the inheritance that they can't steal. When we look at all these different things that we are, we can't ignore that we have African genetics, just as well as though we can't ignore that we have European genetics, just as well as Native American, American Indian genetics. So if you want to call foundational Black Americans Africans, then I want you to tell Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Jamaicans, Haitians that when you label yourself as a Jamaican, I want you to put African on the front of it. When you label yourself as a Puerto Rican, because that is what you are because of your ethnogenesis, I want you to put African on the beginning of it. And whether you're from Belize or Trinidad, oh, you're an Afro-Honduran, you're an Afro-Colombian. All these places, depending where the white population is the majority or in rule, they dictate when they say an Afro-Colombian or an Afro this and Afro that, or even an Afro-Mexican, even though the second president of Mexico was a Black man who ended slavery. Again, I digress. But this is what some of these domestic tethers don't know. You guys have a great and wonderful evening. FBAs are not African.